This morning's public hearing on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, our first testifier is Mr. Caleb Stewart Rossiter, Ph.D., Executive Director from the CO2 Coalition, and traveled from the D.C. area, I believe, to be with us today. Thank you, sir, for joining us, and you can begin when you're ready, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Metcalf. In balancing energy needs and environmental protection, not just quality of life, but lives themselves are in the balance, whichever way you lean. So before leaning, it's important to know why. I'm a former professor of statistics, mathematics, and public policy at American University. I direct an alliance of 55 climate scientists and energy economists called the CO2 Coalition. I'm happy to report that when I retire in January, I'll be replaced by a talented Pennsylvanian, geologist Gregory Wrightstone. Mark Twain famously identified three descending gradations of falsehood: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Analyzing the magical claims by the Department of Environmental Protection about RGGI, I'd like to add models to that list. As a professor, I taught not just statistics and mathematical modeling, but also their use in cost-benefit analysis for public policy. We must include all the costs, not just all the benefits, to find the net effect of a policy decision like RGGI, and DEP does not. Statistics and modeling are often combined into one technique, which we broadly call multiple regression or econometrics. It controls for all variables so you can see the independent effect of each one. But DEP dispenses with this technique and provides you with a lawyer's one-sided brief rather than an accountant's fair analysis. It uses input-output models that can't distinguish between correlation and causation. A proper analysis would conclude that RGGI is an act of economic, health, and environmental suicide. It will raise electricity prices, increase health problems and mortality, and damage the environment. And it won't even affect the level of the dreaded, but actually beneficial, CO2 emissions. First, a look at the science. The lead picture on the DEP website for RGGI, contradicting all the peer-reviewed science and the UN body that studies climate change, shows emergency workers surveying a flooded town. I can't believe that we are 15 years since Al Gore stood and tried to convince the world that Hurricane Katrina came from SUVs and not the normal flow of events, and we're looking at a picture like this to justify your policy. As a professor, I taught my students about the Latin enemies of logic. This one is called post hoc ergo propter hoc. Correlation is causation. CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere have increased due to industrial emissions. We have a flood. The increase must be the cause of the flood. But weather is not climate change. The UN reports no statistically significant change in rates of extreme weather, including floods, in the era when CO2 emissions were large enough to cause measurable warming. We are not in a CO2-driven climate crisis. That is the scientific fact. Some models predict we may be in one in 100 years, but even their estimated damages pale next to the fossil-fueled increase in wealth we will have on hand to address them. And remember, there are benefits to CO2 emissions, since the molecule is a crucial plant and plankton food. Now to economics. RGGI is not a market-based approach, as claimed by DEP. We already have an energy market, and the result is that over 80% of American energy comes from fossil fuels. Why? Because they are inexpensive, reliable, and efficient. RGGI is a market-distorting approach. It taxes fossil fuels even more than the $50 billion they're already net taxed. It subsidizes so-called renewable sources of energy. There is nothing renewable about renewable energy. The sun and wind are indeed free and recurring, but turning their energy into electricity is fossil fuel intensive. Minerals for blades, panels, and batteries have to be mined in horrific conditions in Africa, powered by fossil fuels. They have to be refined, transported to America, manufactured and erected on platforms requiring massive amounts of concrete, another major source of CO2 emissions. Then come the lengthy transmission lines that bring the power to populated areas. And you still have to back up the intermittent electricity with fossil fuel plants. DEP says Economic modeling shows that participating in RGGI will lead to a net increase of more than 27,000 jobs and add $1.9 billion to the gross state product in Pennsylvania. Huh? You're going to raise the cost of energy dramatically, reduce reliable fuels in favor of intermittent ones, and that's going to increase jobs and productivity? How's that working out for California this week? Renewable electricity, once subsidies are factored in, costs 4 times as much per kilowatt hour as natural gas electricity. When states are mandated to provide renewable energy, the result is blackouts, misery, and reduced economic activity. Now, how did DEP do its magical thinking? Through the Regional Economic Models Incorporated, or REMI, input-output model. Input-output models change a single parameter, in this case the addition of the money taken from electricity providers in RGGI auctions, and then estimate the economic impact as it cascades through the economy. Sure, spending that money creates jobs and growth. But remember, that same amount of money is also removed from the economy as the effective tax is passed along to consumers of the electricity. So its impact on growth and jobs is immediately canceled out. RGGI estimates incorrectly count only benefits and not costs, and even ignore the harm to the competitiveness of your industries of raising the cost of energy inputs. Now let's turn to the model health claims. DEP models health benefits from RGGI's reduction not in CO2, carbon dioxide, but in coal-fired pollutants like sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and particulate matter. DEP estimates that up to 639 premature deaths will be avoided by 2030 because of Pennsylvania's participation in RGGI. But that will mostly be due not to RGGI policy, but rather fracking's dramatic reduction in the price of natural gas electricity that will reduce coal-fired power. Affordable heating saves far more lives than coal-fired electricity loses. A 2019 study for the National Institutes of Health estimated that 11,000 lives are saved in America each year by fracking. When costs are low, more people use enough heat to stay healthy. DEP's failure to do a full cost-benefit mortality analysis for a policy change, or even in this case, a production change due to other factors, is inexcusable. The same goes for the claimed 30,000 less hospital visits from asthma from ground-based ozone, which is a byproduct of fossil fuels. DEP did not factor in increased hospitalization for deadly pneumonia and bronchitis from more expensive heating. In addition, the NOx, the nitrogen oxide that creates ozone, which then stimulates asthma, can be successfully scrubbed to low levels with modern coal power technology. This coal cleaning technology is in operation in America only at the Turk plant in Arkansas because it was the only one under construction when the natural gas revolution exploded. A retrofit with this technology would be a lot cheaper than RGGI hamstringing the economy, which has its own health impacts. Finally, let's take DEP's environmental claims. As you reduce emissions from coal and natural gas, you have to compensate with wind, solar, hydro, or nuclear. But the construction of dams, say in your Pine Creek Gorge, or wind turbines, say throughout your state's game lands, would indeed have tremendous environmental costs. And while the solar-powered grid electricity you would use comes from states that are thousands of miles away, as Americans, we can't just ignore the environmental costs there. As Johnny Cash used to sing about trucking, there ain't no easy run when it comes to providing Pennsylvanians with affordable, reliable energy. There will always be trade-offs. Governor Wolf justified his RGGI order by dramatically claiming that average temperatures in Pennsylvania, as is the case globally, has increased 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit in the past 110 years. But that global increase began with an entirely natural warming after the Little Ice Age ended in the 18th century. Half of the increase came from 1920 to 1950, before CO2 levels were large enough to cause measurable warming. The UN climate body is only confident of all that warming that more than half of the more recent half of total warming, from 1980 to today, came from industrial CO2. Pretending that all the warming for 110 years was human-caused is misleading. A quarter is more likely, according to the UN. Please finally note that RGGI errs scientifically in including methane in the warming gases it controls. I have with me today for the committee a recent study called Methane and Climate by 2 leading atmospheric physicists in our coalition. Methane emissions are only 1/10 as powerful in forcing as carbon dioxide. Each molecule is 30 times more potent, true, but we only have 1/300th the level of methane emissions that we do of carbon dioxide emissions. It's a very minor product and warming gas in total. So it's 1/10 as important as CO2, and CO2 is about 1 degree for a doubling, which takes hundreds of years. Cows and pipelines can rest easy in Pennsylvania. I look forward to hearing your perspectives and taking your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.